All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my TED Talk. So I'm going to be talking about honey laundering right here because, oh, honey, she's laundering. Next slide. Okay, what is honey laundering? So honey laundering is honey that is falsely being sold as 100% honey. It contains additives such as high fructose corn syrup, rice syrup, and it also is diluted, so it's not like 100%. You probably will get some water in it too. And the majority of honey that is being sold as fake honey is coming from China right now. It's an international problem, but there's more than just the dilution and the additives that are in your honey. Get some funny honey in your next slide, please. All right, so funny honey business. All right, so honey imported from China has been known to contain antibiotics and pesticides. So usually this happens when Chinese beekeepers spray their hives for, infection or diseases. But recently, the most common antibiotic that's been found in Chinese honey is chloramfenicol, which is linked to cancer, and it also can trigger a kind of immune response called aplastic anemia. So essentially, the body will stop making enough healthy blood cells, and that will cause fatigue in the long run, and then you will also be more prone to infection as a whole to your immune system. So why do we even begin to import Chinese honey or foreign honey to begin with? It's because we have a large gap in our consumption and production ratio. So basically, we only produce like US 150 million pounds, but our demand is 400 million pounds. Oops, that is my watch. My bad. Okay. So, how is Chinese honey bypassing the market? So, essentially, they go through a step which is called ultrafiltration. And so, this essentially removes any beneficial pollen, and it allows for a more stable shelf life. And that, in turn, will actually mask the trace of origin of the honey, which is, kind of weird. I'm not even typically, sure how they even trace it, but, that's beyond me. So
you look at the pollen.
Oh, you actually do look at, so that's
if you take the pollen and you observe it under a microscope, you can tell what sort of genus or even species of flower the pollen comes from. So if the honey is supposedly citrus honey from California, you would expect to find citrus pollen in it.
So yeah, I should have put that in if I didn't.
No worries, you're doing great.
Okay. So to combat this, the U.S. has actually put in high tariffs to kind of decrease the amount of honey that we can import from China. But what happens is they actually go around this and they sell it to middleman countries like Argentina, Mexico, and Canada. And then as a result, the tariffs don't become placed on those countries, and so it kind of bypasses the U.S. market. So if honey is tested / deemed bad honey, the seller will actually just try to sell it again in hopes that no one will be tested. So that's kind of scary. Okay, so buyer beware. How will you know if the honey you get is 100% pure honey? Well, honey, let me tell you, you will only know if you actually have a direct relationship with your beekeeper, local beekeeper. You gotta buy from them. So actually, this is my jar of honey I have at home that I bought from the store. And so I thought, oh, look, it's unblended, it's unfiltered, it's undiluted. But then I didn't read the fine print after buying it. Selected honey from USA, Argentina, and Vietnam. So, I mean, I could probably have fake honey, but it tastes good, and I spent a lot of money on it, so I'm not complaining. So, important to note that there aren't actually any federal standard testing to report honey laundering, but the select states that do are California, North Carolina, and Florida. And they do have tests, but they're not actually required to report any fake laundered honey to the USDA or the FDA. And that is my presentation.
All right, thank you.
That's crazy, all the stuff that they make us farmers go through with that, and then they don't have to report to the USDA.
No.
Really? That's pretty.
No. I think for the most part they would. I mean, if it's tainted honey coming from another country, you would think that would get reported to the FDA. But there's a lot of honey coming in. You kind of expect there's a certain amount that's going to slip by. Like Pat said, it's hard to tell. My recommendation, and when I buy honey, what I usually do is you look really close at the bottles. I usually spend 5-10 minutes in the honey looking at various bottles. But what you really want to see is some sort of documentation that it is sourced from the United States and that it was also bottled in the United States. Because sometimes what they'll do is they will take honey from the U.S., send it over the border, ultrafilter it, cut it, and send it back. So it's U.S. honey, but it's still adulterated. So you'd like to keep everything in the supply chain. Honestly, what you can also do is just go to the farmer's market. You're almost guaranteed at any given farmer's market to see some bee person there selling their honey. And you'll pay a little extra, but you'll know that that is honey that came from hives here in the Central Valley or, round about that area.
That's where Bebop's and stuff, right?
Exactly. You can buy it from Bebop. But yeah, Bebop's not cutting his honey as best I know, so. We can ask him when he gets in. Hey, Bebop. Cut your honey?
If he gets defensive, why?
What is? I don't know what you're talking about.
It's crazy. Take this.
Suspiciously, a little jar of high fructose corn syrup rolls out of his bag. Bebop. All right. So, we kind of started this a few weeks ago. We got into sort of the more practical applied side of things, but we've had a lot of guest speakers. We've had a lot of hands-on stuff. So now we're going to actually talk about what are the basics of getting started and doing hive management if you want to do practical beekeeping. So today's going to be a little bit of review in terms of, we're going to touch on things that other speakers have touched on, but I kind of wanted to put them into a single source that you can reference, and then also just get into a little more detail on some things I think people didn't necessarily touch on. Something.
Bridge back there going? They have a small child in there. Whoa.
That is ridiculous. Of course, there is no small child in that fridge. Do not open that fridge. Yeah, that thing's dying. I should really just unplug it and get rid of it. But as is evidenced by the presence of that thing here since the beginning of the semester, who knows when it will eventually leave. Yeah, the compressor's going.
What is this thing?
Oh, that. You know what? Let's not talk about course stuff. I don't have stuff to talk about. Before they renovated the room, not that projector, they had a great big honking projector, and it was inside that, and it was in the ceiling, and it would go, it would come in and out. This used to be electric too, and you can see they just tore it out and put in a regular standard full chain. So
it used to be a cool classroom.
Yeah.
Then we built the
Hey.
research lab.
I'm here. What? This is still a cool classroom. Please. Anyway, next week we've got Rocky Cunin coming in. She's a research entomologist with Bayer Crop Science. And normally Bayer Crop Science research scientists look at killing insects, but she also likes bees. So she does some interesting research on forage. On Tuesday, she's coming in to talk about bees and pesticides and to go over best management practices in almonds. If you're talking about bees and insecticides or fungicides or anything, 99% of the time you're talking about almonds. And that's really where most beekeepers have their concerns over exposure. So she's going to focus in on that. And then on Thursday, we're going out to the Bayer Crop Science farm. She has planted a year-round hedgerow where basically they have forage sources that bloom all year round, all around the outside of the farm, and it's all planted with these really drought-tolerant shrubs and annuals and the like, so it's very low water. It's a really interesting project. She's looked a lot into integrated forage resources into agricultural systems.
Where's that location?
I'll put out the address, but it's like just outside of town, like a 20-minute drive from campus. So we'll meet there at 8, and it's one of those deals again where we'll probably be wrapping up around 8:50, 8:55, so you have plenty of time to get back to campus if you have a 9:30.
I think that NRCS actually pays people to put down that year-round forage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there are definitely systems in place for that. So today we're going to go over the basic kit, PPE equipment, bee sourcing, and where you're actually going to put your bees in apiary. Again, going highly abbreviated because we've kind of covered some of this when we went to Daydamp, when we talked to Mike, when we went out to look at the farms. And then we'll move into basic hive maintenance.
goods. So as far as PPE is concerned, what we find is there's a really big range in what is acceptable protective equipment when working with bees. We have been much more on the maximum side of PPE because we are starting out. We have people who haven't been stung by bees in a long time, so we're not absolutely certain of their relative reactivity to bees. But the main idea, right, is that at maximum, we're talking about coveralls, we're talking about a veil and hood that zips directly on, shoulder length or elbow length gloves, elastic cuffs tucking into your boots, odds and ends like that. But if you look at like professional beekeepers, and you guys saw this when we were out there with the Hyatts, that I believe his name was Mark, all he wore was a veil and a button-up shirt, right? Like he's been beekeeping for years and years and years. He's at a comfort level with the bees where he doesn't even wear gloves when he works with the bees. So sort of the very minimum is a veil. And that's really the takeaway here is that if you're going out into an apiary, if you're going to work with bees, you always, always, always wear a veil. And I don't think I know any beekeepers who don't. When I was doing a bit of Google image searching around, the only people who I didn't see wearing veils were like Instagram models who were like holding their bees, you know, and it was kind of like, yeah, I don't think she's really a beekeeper. I think she's tapping into the beekeeping market. But anyway, lonely beekeepers. But anyway, the major reason to wear a veil is that bees have a tendency to sting at areas with contrasting features. So they go after the face where there's lots of dark shadows and lines. They like to go after the cuffs of your sleeves, of your pants. And so basically you want to secure those areas from the bees. The other major reason is that stings to your face can be substantially more serious than stings to other parts of your body. Someone who's relatively non-reactive to bee stings normally on, say, their torso, their arms, or their legs, may swell up tremendously when stung on the face. So in general, just protect your face. And veils aren't particularly expensive or difficult to put on. I mean, this is just sort of a simple standalone veil. Basically, it's just a hat, right, with some netting that fits over it. It's pretty common to see these with these ropes attached to them, so you can cinch them however tightly or not tightly you want, and you can tie it around your body. But again, we kind of went over this before, but they come in a variety of styles. Each of them is going to have their various trade-offs. It's just a matter of whichever one you find to be the most useful. The only recommendation as far as veils are concerned is just to make sure it's tight, and generally to tuck your shirt collar into the veil so the bees don't have anywhere to go, so popping your collar is acceptable in the apiary, just because otherwise the bees will crawl under your collar and into your shirt. That's a less than desirable experience. Beyond that, everything else is just your comfort level. If you feel pretty comfortable with bees, generally you can do the work in a t-shirt. General recommendations, though, are to wear shirts with tight cuffs to discourage bees from trying to climb up. What you could even do is just get elastic bands and put them around your cuffs. Many beekeepers don't like gloves like the ones we have. We have those really thick. Actually, and these are even relatively thin. These are those goat skin gloves, which are kind of the standard. Oh, look, there's a stinger in there. A lot of keepers don't like those because if you're out there managing hive after hive after hive, you're limited in dexterity. You might be smashing bees. So a lot of people don't use gloves. They do it completely barehanded. Something that's becoming more and more popular is wearing examination gloves, those nitrile or latex gloves you see at the doctor's office or in a laboratory setting. They don't stop the bees from stinging you. The bees can sting through those gloves, but the advantage of those gloves is that for whatever reason, separating the bees from your skin, it makes them less defensive, and so they'll crawl over the gloves, and they don't seem to know that you're a living thing, that they could sting. So it reduces the number of stings, but if they do sting, they can still get you. And the other major thing with PPE, and this is my last point, is in general, if you're going to go out there in just a veil, you want to avoid any sort of thing that's going to encourage the bees to sting. And in general, bees will sting if you're wearing dark colors. They don't like dark colors. They don't like contrasting patterns, or more accurately, contrasting patterns kind of look to them like resources. And they don't like rough textures. If you're wearing something that's fuzzy, like a wool sweater, the main reason they don't like that is bees will land on you and investigate you. If they land on something that's really fuzzy, they'll get tangled in it, and their response is to sting. So that's just sort of their thing. Beyond that, strong smells are a no-go. So if you really have bad BO, that's been shown to get bees pretty aggravated. Gets me kind of aggravated too. But yeah, BO, but also like floral perfumes. I mean, that should make sense, right? You don't want to smell like a flower if you're out there dealing with bees that, smell things as sort of their primary communication. Scented shampoos that smell like fruits or flowers also have been known to get bees all upset. And also bananas. It's recommended you don't eat a banana before you go out and work the apiary. It's because about 35% of the alarm pheromone is a common aromatic that's found in banana oils. And so bananas kind of smell like an alarm pheromone to bees. And there's various people who do these videos where this is a myth, and they'll throw a banana on top of a beehive or something, and the bees are just chilling out what's going on here? Why are you throwing bananas at us? And they're bananas don't do anything. But if you consume the banana, it seems to be something with consuming it and then breathing out the banana smell. I don't know if it's heating it or the partial digestion or something, but that seems to activate the smell. And there's a fair amount of evidence from people who will eat a banana and then blow on the entrance of a hive, and the bees get really agitated.
Is there a reason why bananas are alarm pheromones supposed to live?
I think it's just random chance. But yeah, I'm not sure myself. All right. So, we've talked about hives previously, so I won't dwell on the point, but just to give a brief review on some of the major components, right? Hives are basically composed of 4 major parts, right? You got a bottom board. Bottom boards come in 2 flavors. There's the solid, which is the traditional bottom board. This is what a solid would look like. These solids are a pretty common style where they're reversible, where you'll see on this side, you basically have 4 lips and then an entrance on one side. This would be the winter side, where the lip is pretty small, so that if I were to put a box on this, the entrance would only be maybe, a 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch high. This would be the summer entrance side. You see the lip is a fair bit deeper, right? Winter, summer. And the idea is this just gives a bigger entrance so the bees can produce more airflow through the hive. So the summer side lets you keep the hive cool. The winter side lets you keep the hive warmer. Basically, that's it. On the flip side, you've got the screen bottom hive boards. These would have a little plastic tray you put in there, but I left the trays over in the 106, so I don't have them. But you have a tray in here, and you can fill that tray with oil, or you can put a sticky card in here. And the idea is if you have hive beetles, if you have wax moths, if you have varroa mites, they're going to fall through this board, and you can catch them, and you can monitor them that way. Some keepers don't like these because you don't get to control the airflow in a hive like this, because you're going to get air coming up through the bottom all the time. And so it's hard for the bees to do a really good job of temperature regulating this. There's a guy, I believe his name is Randy Oliver. He's called the Scientific Beekeeper. He's up in I want to say the Wood Lake area? No. He's somewhere up around Sacramento, regardless. And he's a commercial beekeeper, but he's really scientifically inclined, and he runs lots of trials on these things. He took 400 of his hives and put them on IPM boards, which is another name for a screen bottom board, IPM boards, because they're used for varroa mite IPM. And he put 400 of his hives on the traditional bottom boards, and he measured the amount of pest control he got and the ease of pest monitoring. And he basically said any reductions in mites and beetles and things he had were so negligible on those
that it was, completely canceled out by stress from the bees for having to do a lot more temperature regulation. So he switched over completely to solids. So solids are cheaper. They appear to do just as good of a job as the screen bottoms, so I'd stick to solids personally. Bee boxes, we've shown before, right? But right, they're basically those hollow boxes. In general, if you want to maintain a hive, at the very least, what you need is 1 deep. That's the bare minimum of what you need to keep your hives going. In general, most people would recommend starting out with 2 deeps. So sort of the setup I have right up here, right? I've got 2 deeps, and then I've got 1 super on top of that. Now, you wouldn't have the super on all the time, but the idea is your deeps would be your permanent residence for your hive, and then you would add and subtract supers as the nectar flow goes on. All right, so the covers. Now, we talked about this a little bit previously, but basically there's 2 major types of covers. Round about here in the valley, what you see a lot of are migratory covers. They're just like a flat sheet of plywood with a little lip on the bottom edge at the front and back, so it just fits over the top of the hive. A lot of keepers like the migratory covers because they don't have this lip over the edge like the telescoping cover does, so you can just push all your hives together on a pallet and lift them up and put them down and move them around very easily. The telescoping cover, which is what we have, as you can see, is a much bulkier cover. It fits over the edge of the hive. And then, I guess I left the inside covers over at the other room. But then on the inside, they would have an extra cover that fits on top of your frames, between here and the frames. The advantage of a telescoping cover is that it retains heat a lot better. So if you're in a cold climate, like if you're beekeeping up in Colorado or the north central United States, this is going to help your bees in the wintertime a lot. But here in California, the bees never really truly overwinter, as best we can tell, unless you have them up in the foothills. So there's not much of a point of having this. Why did I get telescoping covers? Because Stan recommended it the day Dan. So I got telescoping covers.
I saw some beehives, a lot of them actually, on the covers they have like a little hole and they have like a water bottle on it. Like what is that actually?
So we'll talk about that a little later, but basically that's a feeding hole.
Okay, because I see on the covers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what you can do is take like a jar full of feed and just sort of pop it in that hole, and it's got a hole straight to the bees right down here, and so the bees can then come up and get sugar syrup out of that feeding structure. Right. And then lastly, you have your frames. We talked about frames, so I basically will just point out, right, that again, they're frames. You can get boxes that are designed to have 8 frames or 10 frames, and basically there's no advantage to one versus the other. Some beekeepers swear by 8-frame hives. You're going to get less bees and less honey per hive. You're going to have to support more woodware. But the advantage is let's say you're a pollinating guy, right? You make your money every year selling pollination services. If you use 10-frame hives, you can get 4 hives on a pallet. If you use 8-frame hives, you can get 6 hives on a pallet, right? That's, basically an extra, 2 hives per pallet. That's X hives per truck. You're getting a lot more hives out there. And if you're getting paid by the hive, it's a good investment to just get more hives on the truck. So that's when I see people with 8 frames, that's usually what they do.
Back to the bottom board, the summer side of the bottom board, you said it's a larger, like a 3/4 inch gap. Do they ever try to fill that up because it is a larger gap?
Yeah, some bees will. So like we talked about the Caucasian bees that really like the Carnelian bees that really like to gum stuff up with propolis.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they'll try and do that. But lots of bees will leave it relatively open just to get that airflow going.
Like here in California, during the winter, like they usually bit.
I'm not sure if we do a lot of that here in California. I imagine that you'll see a lot of variability between beekeepers because
I would imagine there are some beekeepers who just don't bother. They go out there, they do their fall inspections, they're like, good enough. But I imagine there are a handful who will go through the trouble of actually flipping the boards. Probably would also depend on how cold it is. If you're down in Southern California, or if you're near the coast, I wouldn't ever flip it. I mean, how cold does it get? Here in the Central Valley, I might, because it actually does get kind of
So when
chilly.
you're not using supers, where would you store them?
A lot of people store them in just like big open yards. So, you'll have like some shack on your property. The commercial guys, some of them, like, there's a guy, I should figure out where he is. There's a beekeeper everybody's been talking about who's up in the foothills, who is supposedly has like his own warehouse just completely full of pallets of boxes and the like, and he does all his own building and maintenance and stuff, and I'd love to see it just to be like, well, see what an industrial beekeeping operation looks like. But a lot of them, just store it on their own property in their garage. I think a lot of the sideline beekeepers, people who maintain like 100-something hives, as a side project to make money, a lot of them just don't use their garages anymore. So, that's sort of their main storage yard.
I remember Mike mentioning that up in the foothills there was a bloom that was bad for the bees. Would you ever recall what that was?
California buckeye.
California buckeye?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, California buckeye, the pollen is toxic to the brood. So the nectar is fine, but if you're ramping up your population, the brood are getting it, it'll, stunt the hives.
What was the purpose of that reducer entrance for the little bar that could usually go on?
The entrance reducer, that's another way of sort of maintaining colony temperature. So if you look at our hive up here, right, you've got this entrance that's basically open all the way side to side, and the bees oftentimes will prop this shut to a narrower entrance. So you can basically pop that little reducer bar in that entrance. It's just the right size to fit in there, and it will cut down the entrance from being this big to maybe this big. And in the winter, you can cut it down to being this big, like really small. And let's say you're having robbing behavior, you have a bunch of bees from a strong hive trying to steal the honey from a weak hive, you can use an ultra small entrance for that. And that'll basically just create a situation where it's like in 300, right? You got this narrow little entrance that a lot of bees are trying to fit through, right? And you can use a really small force to defend a small opening, is the idea. So weak hives stand a better chance of protecting themselves. All right. Beyond that, the only other tools you really definitely need, right, are hive tools. Hive tools, right, are just generally used for prying and moving things around. So if you're like trying to move a super right and you're trying to yank it off, the bees are going to glue everything together. So like when you come up to the hive, it's going to be difficult to get it apart. So generally what you want to do, right, is like sort of just, knock the hive tool in. It's got this blunted edge so you can pop it. Then you just pry things up. Generally, people need the tool also for prying the frames up where they get glued together. So it's just a general use tool. It's got a nice scraping end, so you can scrape propolis off, or if you find bird hum, you can pop it off and get rid of it. Nice and easy. Smoker, of course, is an essential sort of tool. Smoker actually is oftentimes considered the other essential part of PPE. At the very least, you need a veil and a smoker. It's not advised to ever open up a hive without a smoker. Smokers have a lot of benefits. The major thing is that smoke instigates basically a fleeing response in the bees. It tells the bees that there might be some danger around, a forest fire essentially. So the bees will disperse, they'll go back into the hive, they will glut themselves on honey, and they'll become very docile. So they're easy to manipulate. The other thing it does is it masks odors. So if you get stung and you got some alarm pheromone, the bees are trying to get agitated, that smoke's going to hide that alarm pheromone. It's going to keep you a little bit safer from the bees. And the other important piece of equipment is a cell phone. If you are working with bees, oftentimes you're working in remote locations where you may not be near near a medical facility. And so if you get stung in such a way that you have a bad reaction, you want to always have a cell phone on yourself to make contact and to basically get medical help. It's also generally recommended not to go out and do a lot of beekeeping by yourself somewhere isolated. So if you're maintaining hives somewhere far away, try and take a buddy with you. So as far as smoker use is concerned, the major thing you want is you want to make sure that you have smoke coming out, but you want it to be a nice, cool smoke coming from sort of a smolder, right? You want the material to just sort of be smoldering in the can so that when you pop it out, you're not blowing like a bunch of freaking sparks on the bees, right? That's going to make the bees mad. Also, I mean, the bees are made, like their wings are made of chitin, it's really thin. If you blow hot smoke on them, it'll singe and cause their wings to twist up and they won't be able to fly, so you'll be damaging your bees. So generally, you just want the smoke to be sort of billowing out. There's a variety of fuels that are known to produce a smoke like this, and there is no correct fuel. It's basically what's available to you. So a lot of people around here use burlap. That seems to be sort of the popular one that I see a lot of here in California. If you're out on the East Coast, people use a lot of pine needles because there's pine trees everywhere. But pine needles are known to sort of make a lot of smoke but not burn very hot. Baling twine, dry grass, wood pellets, they're all fine. It's just about your preference. In general, it's considered good practice when lighting a smoker. What you want to do is get some of the starter fuel sort of twisted up into a tight clump, and then light that. Let that get good and burning, and then tamp it down into the bottom of the smoker using your hive tool. Once it's in there, you can add some more material onto the top of it, and then use the billows to sort of just get the fire nice and going. Let it sit for a while until it starts smoking a lot, and then cap it. And in general, when a smoker's going, what you want is you want the smoker to be sitting by itself and to just sort of slowly have smoke, you know, just coming out at a constant rate. If it starts to look like it's going out, you can puff it a few times to try and stoke that fire up. But generally, it's going to take you a couple minutes to get the smoker going. So the last thing you want is to be in there with your bees. They're starting to get agitated. You grab your smoker and nothing comes out, right? And then you have to cover the hive back up, go and restoke your smoker, take care of it. From everything I've heard, the first couple times you make a smoker go, you're going to suck at it. But, you know, practice, practice, practice. You'll eventually be able to do it very well. All right. So functionally, the whole point of PPE in a smoker, right, is to avoid stings. So let's just talk about stings real quick. As far as stings are concerned, they're grouped into three major categories of how people react to stings. There are normal stings, allergic stings, and toxic stings. Or more accurately, normal reactions, allergic reactions, and toxic reactions. But so, normally, if you're not hypersensitive to bees, what do you expect, right? It's basically you're going to get stung. There's going to be a raised white wheal, an area of local swelling where the sting went in. There's going to probably be a little hole in the middle, or the stinger's going to be sitting right in the middle. And then all around that wheal, it's going to be red. And generally, it's going to itch or it's going to hurt a little bit. Might feel a little bit hot, too. And that's just sort of the normal reaction. How long that lasts is going to vary on a case-by-case basis. The venom blends of the different bee varieties are a little different. So you might react more to an Italian sting than you would to a Carniolian sting, to an Africanized sting. Different parts of the bodies have different reactions. So a sting to the face, like I mentioned earlier, may be very different than a sting to the arm. So, you know, but generally a sting, the pain is going to last for a couple hours to maybe a week, depending on where it is. So this is kind of what you expect normally, right? Pretty typical sting. Little dot in the middle where the stinger was, raised area, redness all around it. Not particularly huge. Now, in general, if you get stung, the recommendation is just to make sure you get the stinger out. Bees, of course, honeybees leave their stingers behind. What you want to do is basically get some sort of object like a stick or a credit card or even the sleeve of your arm and just swipe across the sting. The goal is to cut it off from the edge and pull it out sideways. One of the major reactions you have when you see a stinger is just to grasp it and pull it out. You know, what's the problem with that?
You're just injecting yourself with more.
Exactly. The bees leave behind their venom sac, right? So the stinger's in there with the venom sac and some muscles that squeeze the venom sac, pumping venom into your body. So if you grab it, you're going to grab the stinger and the venom sac, and you're basically just going to inject all that venom in one go. Right. And that's going to make the sting so much worse. Scraping it sideways, you're not going to squeeze the venom sac as much. You're going to remove the stinger. Generally, just going to make your life better. So if you get stung, sideways scrape. That's the idea. Oh, I even wrote on there, squeeze the venom sac, so you guys should have known that. And you did. There you go. All right. And then the basic treatment for a normal sting that's recommended is just find some way. Honestly, if you're a beekeeper and you get stung, most beekeepers don't care. They're like, oh, that's the price of doing the work, right? Sort of like if you're weeding, you're going to get, thorns and crap in your hands from the weeds. It's sort of the price of doing the work. Generally, if you're concerned about a bee sting, it's probably because, your neighbor got stung or someone who's out in the apiary got stung or something. And the major part is just making them feel better. It's sort of psychological, right? It's like, oh, you got stung, let me help you. Kind of fuss over it a little bit, But in general, applying something cold will alleviate the swelling. It will also limit the spread of the venom. So just putting something cold on there is going to stop the venom from spreading very quickly, and that'll reduce the severity. And beyond that, like over-the-counter itch medications and antihistamines are known. People say things like put honey, baking soda, all that stuff on there. It all works well enough because it's largely psychological. You're doing something about the sting. So, it makes people feel better, so they feel better. Placebo effect. Of course, antihistamines actually do something. Allergic reactions. Allergic reactions are basically just the next step up. They're characterized by a reaction that's body-wide. So you're talking about itching in hives across the body, generalized swelling at the site, so more so than just the tiny little wheal. And in the most severe cases, it's going to cause you difficulty in breathing and dizziness from low blood pressure. So these are bee stings that are actually dangerous. In general, these allergic reactions fall under two major categories. The most serious of which is what's called a systemic reaction. That's when this occurs very, very quickly. So you're stung, and within a matter of 1 or 2 minutes, you are unconscious because your throat is swollen shut. There's also large local reactions. This would be where you are stung, and then you seem fine, but the reaction slowly builds up until it becomes severe. There are cases where people get stung, and like a day later, their face swells up or something from the reaction. So that'd be these would be examples of allergic reactions, right? Facial swelling, general just swelling in the hands and the like. This is what sort of the hives would look like, swelling, bumps raised up on the skin across the body. This is, the examples of a very bad sting. Obviously, these are more like large localized because she's not in the hospital right now, as best we can tell. But generally, those are the sorts of things that will happen. So treating, it's going to depend on the severity. Obviously, if you're having some sort of systemic, I guess I start with large local, I'll just mention systemic. If you're having a systemic reaction and you're starting to swell immediately, or so you obviously see somebody is, the first thing is you call 911. Right? You want to get them to a medical facility as quickly as possible. If you have an EpiPen or an emergency sting kit, you can administer those. In general, an issue with EpiPens is that you are injecting a large quantity of a stimulant into somebody's body, and so there is a certain amount of liability. And so, for example, as a faculty at Fresno State, I am discouraged from applying EpiPens to students because of potential liability and the fact that we can get a student to a hospital in about 2 to 3 minutes from the middle of Fresno. So, depends on where you are. If you're working with bees up in the foothills and you're not anywhere near a medical facility, having an EpiPen around might be useful.
How does an EpiPen actually work? What does it do?
If I understand correctly, an EpiPen, right, is basically an automatic injector. So you punch it into somebody's leg, and it will automatically inject the chemical. The chemical is basically a huge dose of stimulants, and so the idea is it's sort of like more movie references, like in Pulp Fiction, right? Anyone seen Pulp Fiction? Oh, either way, there's a scene where a woman overdoses on heroin, and they stab her with adrenaline right in her heart, right? And the idea is the adrenaline stimulates your body. It's similar with an EpiPen. It's like a huge dose of adrenaline, and what it does is it opens up all of your capillaries, it opens up all your airways, and you basically just like, you know, like a massive dose. And of course, injecting massive amounts of adrenaline into somebody's body can be dangerous, and so that's why we're discouraged from using EpiPens. But again, if you're far out somewhere, it's not a bad thing to do. And I've heard, I've been first aid trained a variety of times, and we were taught about EpiPens by this dude who used to be an EMT. He always told this story of having to go to several bee sting cases where somebody went to stab someone with an EpiPen. But the idea with an EpiPen is you remove a cap from both sides, and sometimes people don't realize which side has the needle on it. So they grab it, and they put their thumb over the tip, they pump, and they inject their hand with all this adrenaline. So you show up at the site, and there's this guy lying on the ground unconscious from a bee sting, and this other guy's like, hello! Like, I'm having a heart attack! Anyway, that's EpiPens. Plus, EpiPens cost like $600. Right?
Can you purchase them over the counter?
Yeah. Oh, well, no. EpiPens, I think you do need a doctor's note for an EpiPen. But the license for EpiPens was bought by a private company, and they jacked the price up because they knew that nobody else could get them. And so, yeah. So I had a student once who was allergic to bees in entomology, and he's like, okay, so I'm allergic to bees. I can't afford an EpiPen, so here's what I have. And he pulls out these 3 vials and a hypodermic needle. He's like, if I get stung by a bee, first you give me this one, and then you give me this one, and then you give me this one if I don't respond. And I was like, I'm not going to do any of that. I'll call 911 if you get stung, because it's like, I am not injecting you with mystery chemicals in a plastic Ziploc bag.
The student actually told you that?
Yeah. That was an interesting time. Luckily, they didn't get stung by a bee, so didn't have to worry about that. I'm not going to get through my slides today. Okay, large local reactions. So if you start to notice that you're having a large local reaction, a major recommendation is a quick dose of some sort of antihistamine like Benadryl. Benadryl's pretty good at knocking down swelling right off the bat. It'll make you sleepy, but if it's a matter of sleeping or breathing, I'll take sleeping. So, you know, and in general, they again recommend putting on an ice pack. So most beekeepers, they carry around Benadryl with them when they are out working, or they keep it in the first aid kit of their truck or something. And again, always have a cell phone. Oh. And if you know you're a little sensitive to bees, there's this thing called desensitization therapy or desensitization shots. They're kind of like allergy shots for bees, where basically you go to the doctor and they inoculate you with low doses of pure bee venom. And the idea is that if you get these regularly, like every 6 months, it'll make you less sensitive to the bees, so that if you get stung, you'll have a normal reaction instead of an allergic reaction. What they used to do before they could extract pure bee venom is they would inject you with a ground up bee. So they like pull the stinger out, just grind the whole thing up and pop it in you. That didn't work as well. So nowadays they just use straight up bee venom. So a toxic reaction. Toxic reaction is basically when you get stung with so many bees all at the same time that their venom actually causes a toxic reaction in your system. So basically a huge amount of stings in a very short period of time. When we're talking about European honeybees, this is virtually a non-issue. European honeybees don't tend to be very aggressive, but if you bump into an Africanized honeybee hive, you can get stung by very many bees in short order. This is a beekeeper's glove from Arizona who's working on a hive that had been Africanized. You see all these little spots. Those are all stingers that are left by bees in his glove. So you can see just a huge number of stings from opening a single hive. There are recorded cases where people have suffered as much as like 2,000 stings at a time and survived with minor toxic reactions. But yeah, in general, this would be the argument for the more heavy PPE as opposed to the lighter. All right, so how do we avoid stings? Always wear PPE. That's sort of the obvious. Avoid all those triggers I talked about before. And here's another thing. So if you're wearing a veil, right, that doesn't zip shut, bees will get in your veil every once in a while. If a bee gets in your veil, don't take your veil off right by the bees, right? Leave the apiary, then open your veil and get the bee out. You do not want to have your face exposed to the bees while you're in the apiary. That's really the most dangerous thing. Always have a functioning smoker to calm them down. And a big thing is just use slow and deliberate motions when working with bees. Bees react very negatively to sharp motions, so you don't want to swat at bees. You don't want to, sort of like take the hive. You don't want to, keep rattling the frames around. In general, just be slow, be gentle, and as long as you're doing that, the bees are going to be much more pleasant to work with. And honestly, the number one place where experienced beekeepers tend to get stung on the face is they're done working in the apiary, they walk out, they go to their truck, they take off their veil, and they had some bees hitchhiking on the back of the suit where they couldn't see them. So in general, to avoid stings to areas that are covered, get a bee brush and go out when you're checking hives with a buddy or a worker or something like that, and just have them check you. Brush the bees off, make sure you're nice and clean before you take off your PPE. That's going to be the big thing. Oh, and also knowing when to leave hives alone. If you walk up to a hive and it seems particularly aggressive, so if you're like working in a hive and you got lots of bees pinging off your veil, if they seem to be buzzing extra loudly, if a lot of them are coming out and flying around, it might just be a good idea to cover that hive back up and leave and deal with that another day when it's a little less angry. All right, sourcing bees. We talked about this with Mike, but since Mike didn't write anything down, you might have missed any number of things Mike said. But just to give you the quick rundown on bees, when you're sourcing bees and getting started, there's 4 major sources of bees you can get. The first is package bees. Package bees are probably the most common way that people get bees in the United States. It's not super common here in California because we have better sources cheaper. But a package bee is basically just 2 to 3 pounds of what they call bulk workers in a cage with a queen. So you get this in the mail, you shake it out into your hive box, and they settle down into your hive. Nice and easy. There are nukes, or nucleuses. We've seen the nucleus box a few times, right? But it's basically 4 or 5 frames in a little wooden box. Ideally what this is it's a frame with a queen, a whole bunch of brood, and then a couple frames of pollen and honey to keep them going. So they're all related. You pop them in a box, and they go. You can catch wild swarms, which we've talked about a few times. And then you can also just purchase entire hives. Mike talked about that he'll sell pallets of hives to people after the pollination season is done, and he's made his money. Another thing we haven't talked about that I think is kind of interesting is the idea of bait hives. So let's say you know it's swarm season and you want to catch a swarm, but you don't have the time to go out and search for them, or maybe you're really low on the swarm list for the county, so you're not getting a lot of calls. Excuse me. What you can do is basically create a bait hive. Functionally what a bait hive is it's just a regular box. This is a nucleus box. These are just wicker baskets. This is the cheapest version. This is a compostable planter that you can get at a nursery, and it's screwed onto a plywood bottom. Basically, it's just a box with a hole in it, and you put it up 10 feet above the ground in an area where you know swarms are likely to occur, and the bees find it and basically think this is a really great home. The swarm will settle down in it. You come by a few days later, you pop it down, and you shake them into your hives. You got yourself some free bees. You can also buy baits. So if you rub the inside of this with lemongrass extract, hive wax, or you can even buy artificial Nasanov pheromones, all of those things are attractants to bees, and so they'll smell that and they'll beeline it. straight to the hive, and they'll use it. There was a trial at Cornell where they set up 96 bait hives around upstate New York, and I want to say out of those 96, they caught 43 swarms. So relatively high efficacy for these. All right, and lastly, in getting started, let's talk about securing a location. So this is probably one of the more overlooked aspects of beekeeping, but it is probably the most essential, which is that you need to figure out where you're going to put your beehives. You can't just put beehives anywhere, right? I mean, they are buzzing, stinging insects that some people generally don't care for. So generally, you need to figure out what is a location you can put your bees at, and you need to check your local laws and regulations, statutes, zoning, odds and ends like that, to make sure you're allowed to. So for example, you're not allowed to keep bees anywhere in Fresno or Clovis. That's just the law of the land. Are there people who do keep bees in Fresno and Clovis? Yes. But here at Fresno State, we're a little county or state island. We're not beholden to the laws of Fresno, so we can keep bees, which is nice. In general, when you're choosing an apiary site, the main things you want to make sure are just that you have access to resources. You want access to nectar, pollen, and water at minimum. Here in California, water can be hard to come by, of course, so you can sort of create artificial water sources. Lots of people just put out like a 55-gallon bucket with water in it for their bees. Excuse me. And in general, having these resources can be tricky here in the Central Valley where things tend to dry up over the season. So you may ultimately need multiple sites to be able to shuffle your bees around between, or you're going to have to create a pretty aggressive feeding schedule for your bees, giving them sugar on a regular basis to keep them going. And of course, you need to consider potential risk factors. Is your site near humans? Is there a chance of flooding during the wintertime? Is there a lot of wildlife that can get in? Like, if you're up in the foothills, you're going to have to start thinking about things like skunks and bears and odds and ends like that. And what is ideal in an apiary? That's really going to depend on your level. If you're like a hobbyist, honestly, you're looking for convenience. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to put them all on campus, and I'm just going to basically leave them there. I'm not planning on moving these bees around a lot because I want something that I could walk out some afternoons when I'm working and just check the bees. I'm not interested in shuttling them all over the stinking state for their health. But if you're a sideline guy or a commercial guy, you're actually trying to turn a profit, you're going to need better apiaries that aren't just convenient. And so generally, these guys are moving their hives around to different sites depending on the time of year. So lots of guys, Mike talked about this, right? Mike talked about the idea that one of the big boosts that got his beekeeping business off the ground was that he inherited a bunch of sites in the Central Coast where he's allowed to keep his bees. And so he has access to sage during some of the dirts here in the valley, and he can just ship all his bees out there when the time is right. So generally, most commercial and sideline guys, they'll either own multiple sites or rent multiple sites, or they'll have deals with other beekeepers so that they share the bees at different times of the year. Generally, the North Central Midwest, Pacific Northwest, Central Coast, Imperial Valley, and Southern California seem to be sites where people around here ship their bees to at various times of year for all the various crops that are showing up. Well, howdy, Jeff. All right. Oh. So this is something to keep in mind. Jeff's going to take some of our pictures. I hope you all are feeling pretty today. And, yeah. Yo, take a minute. So, drifting. Drifting is an interesting problem with bees. Traditionally, when people set up an apiary, what do? They have all their nice white hives, and they line them up in nice straight rows. And the problem is, bees learn where their hives are by memory. And it's really hard for a bee to remember where their hive is when all the hives look the same and they're all in a straight row with no landmarks to orient on. So if you put all your beehives in a straight row, there's a tendency for bees to drift, which is basically the case where bees leave one colony and join another. We talked earlier about guard behavior, where there are bees that will sit by the entrance and they'll stop other bees from entering the hive if they smell wrong. Guards tend to overlook wrong smells if the bees come with a full honey stomach or a load of pollen. They're kind of like, you can come in. You're gonna, put that nectar, in our honey supplies. And so there's a tendency for bees to move around, and basically they bump into the wrong hive. There's actually some interesting work where if you look at prevailing wind patterns, so for beekeepers that set up straight rows in apiaries where there's a prevailing wind blowing one direction, they find that the biggest, strongest hives are the ones that are the most downwind, and the ones that are the weakest are the ones that are most upwind. And that's because the wind will blow the bees down to that far end, and the drifters will tend to congregate at that area, and they'll tend to be pulled away from the hives furthest up. So it'll give you uneven distribution of resources. It also spreads disease, which is a big issue. So if you have varroa mites in your hive that's furthest upwind, you're going to get varroa mites in all the other hives downwind, because you're going to distribute those bees down the row.
So I see there it says they can't identify their hive from another. What about smell? They don't recognize it by smell?
Well, to smell it, they have to be right up against it, right? And so for a lot of bees, they more or less have to be in the hive to smell it and to know what it is. So by the time they're up there in the hive, I think a lot of them are just kind of like, oh, good enough.
What about the guard cells that are supposed to be in front?
The guards?
Yeah, no guard cells, yeah, guard bees.
Guard bees. Like I was saying, the guard bees don't generally care if you don't belong, if you're bringing food to the hive. So if you come with full pollen baskets or a full honey stomach, full of nectar, they're just kind of like, you're not our bee, but you can come in and drop that off, and come back. That doesn't bother them. But in general, when you're setting up your apiary, there are some rules of the road to setting up your hives to make them more memorable. One thing is just to avoid those straight lines, like we talked about before. You don't want your hives boom, 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 boom in a straight line. That's hard for bees to orient. One of the easiest way you can avoid that is by curving the lines or creating circles. That way the entrances all point in different directions. And because the bees use the sun to navigate, they can sort of tell the direction of their hive entrance. They'll be able to tell one that's facing south versus north versus east versus west. You can paint the hives different colors. So bees can recognize their hive by the patterns on the outside. So some people will use different stack combinations, and bees can tell, like, oh, I'm from the hive with the blue top, the green middle, and the yellow bottom. Or you can mix all those things up. These are some recommended distributions of hives. So here we can see somebody who's using a straight line, but they've got a whole mix of colors going on to help their bees. And these are some various patterns, pointing all the entrances out, pointing all the entrances in, creating these blocks with different directions or an arc. Something to keep in mind is that when you're manipulating a hive, you want to manipulate them from the back, away from the entrance. So you might want to orient your hive so that you have easy access to those backs. That's sort of the advantage of a system like this, where you can stand in the middle and just move hive to hive to hive while you're checking. What a lot of beekeepers do is they do the arc, but they point the hive entrances the other way, so they're all facing out, and that way they can just back their truck up into the middle and get into all the hives very easily. Okay, we got 15 minutes, so we can cover hive maintenance, at least to a certain extent. My battery is low. We'll see how far I get. All right, so hive maintenance. So ideally, once you have all that stuff, right, you got your PPE, you got your hive, you got everything, you're going to need to get into the hive to actually work with it. And so that's just what we're talking about now. So an important thing to recognize is, when is it a good time to get into your hive? There are times of year where it's good to get in the hive, and there are times of year where it's not particularly good. In general, you want to be in the hive when there are the least number of bees there possible. So you want to go in there when they're out foraging. So ideally, times where there's a lot of nectar flow is good. So like right now is a good time. The bees are out in the almonds. Well, almonds are starting to close up now. But a couple of weeks ago, if you went out and you opened up a hive, most of the bees would be out foraging. So you'd have sort of relatively easy time getting in and out without disturbing them too much. Winter and early spring or late fall are a good time because they're at seasonal lows. And in general, what you want to do is go out during optimal forage times. So sunny days, sort of midday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. is when most foraging occurs. On the flip side, you want to avoid any conditions in which bees are stressed out or are building up in the hives in large numbers. So you don't want to open up the hives when it's cold, so like less than 55 degrees. You don't want to go out there when it's cloudy, windy, rainy. You don't want to go out in early morning or late evening when it's dark. Those are all times when the bees are not going to leave the hive, and they're not going to like it when you open up the hive and start bugging them. And you especially don't want to open up the brood boxes during a nectar dearth. So if it's like late summer, early fall, and there's just nothing for the bees to eat, one, they're all going to be in the hive because there's nothing to forage. Two, they're going to be upset because they're starting to get kind of hungry and they know their resources are dwindling. And three, they're probably going to start robbing each other if you start opening hives and giving other bees access to the resources. So in general, if you're out there in the summertime and you're checking your hives, you only want to open up the topmost box and look at the honey super very quickly, and you want to cover it back up. You don't want to expose the entire hive to other bees. And in general, when you're inspecting, you don't want to open the hives for much more than 10 to 15 minutes. The longer you have the hive open, the more stressed the bees are, and the more likely you're going to get robbing going on. And once robbing starts, it's hard to stop it. All right. So opening the hive, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to keep the hive happy while you're inspecting it, the key thing is just keeping your motions very relaxed and very fluid. You don't want to jar it. You want to just be nice and easy. That's going to keep the bees nice and relaxed. Like Brian Hyde said, right? It's like bees are our friends, right? If you are positive about the bees and you are relaxed, the bees are going to be positive and relaxed. It's going to be much easier. Generally, when you're coming up to the hive, you know what, I've got a smoker. Obviously, it's not smoking. Right? In general, you want your puffer. You want to walk up, you want to puff the entrance 2 or 3 times. The bees create an airflow. So if you puff smoke near the entrance, they're going to pull that smoke in and circulate it through the hives themselves. When you open the top, you probably want to puff a couple times in there and give them a few seconds to calm down before you open it. You want to pop the top off. Now, oftentimes the top is going to be propolis down, so you're going to have to pop it off with the hive tool. In general, you're going to want to smoke the bees anytime they seem particularly agitated. Sometimes what the bees will do is they'll sit in here between the slats and they'll look up at you. You might just want to give them a little pop. Just be like, get out of here. It's like spritzing the cat with a water bottle. Ooh, it's full of fire. So be careful with it. Careful, careful. I haven't tried smoking my cat before. I don't know if that would work. All right, like I mentioned before, when you're manipulating the hive, you want to stay on the sides or you want to stay in the back. You never want to stand directly in front of the hive. That's where the bees are coming in and out. That's going to get them really mad. So stick around the sides and back.
Can you over smoke these?
Yes.
What do they do?
It'll just make them, you'll get to a point where you make them mad.
Oh.
And if they get overexposed, they'll just get angry. Bees are exposed to smoke continuously, can abscond. I don't think you could smoke them to that extent when you're inspecting a hive. Right, and we talked about using the hive tool to gently lift things up. All right. So in general, as far as hive inspections are concerned, twice a year you're going to want to inspect your hives for general strength and quality. So you're basically getting in there and you're seeing, are they producing one, are they producing honey? And two, does the brood look healthy? And generally this is going to happen in the early spring or in the late fall when the hives are at their lowest population levels. Early spring is nice because it helps you get the bees ready for the pollination season. Late fall is a good time to check too because you can do hive manipulations to help them with their overwintering. So that's a good time to flip bottom boards, to add food or remove things, and basically just take care of the hives. So in general, when you're doing a hive inspection for strength and quality, you want to start at the bottommost box and work your way up. So an advantage of a telescoping cover is when you're inspecting a hive with a telescoping cover is you can lay it down, and this makes a convenient rack where you can put your smoker, you can put your hive tools, you can put anything you have, and also when you're lifting your boxes off, it's just a nice little place to put your boxes, to stack them up. So if I'm inspecting this hive, I want to get to my bottommost box. I'm showing you what not to do. Don't smack it with your knees while you're going around. So you want to get all the way to your bottommost box. I don't have any frames in here. And when you put the boxes down, generally what you want to have with you is some sort of cloth to cover the boxes with. When these frames are sitting out, other foragers are going to visit them. They're going to smell that honey. They're going to smell that wax. And they're going to think, oh, free resources. And that's when robbing starts. So covering those with a cloth is going to discourage other bees from robbing you.
So would you put that box like someone else, or would you put that box on top of the super?
I guess you could put it on the super. I think I would sort of stack them apart separately. Okay. And I'll just sort of do the rest of this demonstration over here on this one. But from here, basically what you want to do is you want, I mean, if you look inside this box, right? The frames are in there pretty tightly. And so if I'm going to go in here and start pulling up frames, especially if I'm wearing sort of thick leather gloves, it's going to be a little bit challenging. So what a lot of people do is they'll basically use the hive tool to pull out one of the edgemost frames. You take that frame and you basically set it aside somewhere. This gives you a little bit of wiggle room where you can manipulate the rest of these frames, pull them out, take a look at them, and replace them without having to like basically wedge your fingers in these tight little cracks all the time. Uh-oh. Gosh.
You want a charger?
No, that's an iCloud issue. They're all up on me for replacing stuff. But this computer's getting replaced this semester, so I'm just kind of letting it cruise. In general, as far as keeping your frames organized, they sell these little racks that you can put on the side of your box. You can pop the frames on. Lots of people just put them in an empty box they bring with them and then cover that up. Either approach works. And basically what you're going to do at this point is you're going to remove the frames one at a time and you're going to inspect them. You generally want to grasp it on the sides underneath the little frame hooks. You want to hold it over the hive body so that if anything falls off, the bees will go back into the hive. You inspect one side, and you sort of just flip it over like that, and you can observe the other side. Generally, what you want to avoid doing is anything that's going to hurt the bees. So you don't want to go like, you know, because you're going to smash bees with your gloves, you're going to get alarm pheromone going on, you're going to upset the bees. So generally, again, just being gentle. And if you've got a frame where you're looking at it and you just can't see anything because it's covered in bees, you can just sort of go and shake the bees off into the box. They don't seem to mind that too much.
Will it hurt the queen?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. I should have said that from the beginning. So if you're in the bottom box, right, there's a good chance that the queen's going to be in there somewhere. So if you're observing the frames and you're somewhere around the middle where you suspect the queen is going to be, if you're looking at a lot of brood, you don't want to shake the you don't want to shake the queen off and potentially hurt her. That's a big thing. So when you're working through the hive, You basically want to be on the lookout for the queen. You want to be aware of where she is so that you don't accidentally smash her with your fingers or shake her off or do anything that's going to harm her. Because if you kill that queen, you're going to obviously reduce the quality of your hive. You're going to have to start thinking about queen replacements and things like that. In general, it's recommended to return the frames in the order in which you removed them. As we talked about earlier in the semester, right, the brood and the pollen, right, are basically in a central ball that radiates out. So if you take that brood and you shuffle it all around, it's going to be hard for the bees to manage it very well. This is a good time also to remove any burr or brace comb that's in the hive that's causing you issues as far as maintenance is concerned. So if they've got stuff stuck together, you sort of take this hive tool and scrape it off. One thing to keep in mind with the burr and the brace comb is that you can't just sort of flick it on the ground, or at least it's not recommended. Leaving comb around on the ground kind of advertises to pests that you've got bees in the area and that they've got honey and all sorts of good resources. And also, beeswax is something you can sell and use. So if you scrape it off, it's recommended just to have a can or a bucket or something to scrape it into. Take it with you. Oh, they'll give you a ticket if you just throw comb on the ground?
Exposed comb.
Oh, really? Okay. And it's also, yeah, generally also encourages robbing. So a ticket, I'll have to add that. Yeah. And in general, something to keep in mind is what I said earlier, right? If you're here and you're working the hive and the bees start to get pretty aggressive, they're pinging you a lot, you know, they seem to be getting extra aggravated, they start stinging your suit a lot, that might be a good sign to put the hive back together and to leave it alone. All right. So what are you looking for when you're actually doing this inspection? Right? You're looking for a couple different things when you're looking at the frames, trying to figure it out. One thing is you're generally looking at brood health. So one thing you're looking for is evidence of capped brood. You're looking for the number of capped brood cells, and you're looking for the relative completeness. What we expect when you're looking at a good brood frame is that the brood are going to be pretty contiguous. They're going to have more or less a solid area that's capped. If it is a capped brood site, it's going to be either a semicircle or a sort of circular shape. Excuse me. And it's going to be relatively compact. On top of that, you're looking for the relative health of the brood. So basically, are there any signs of disease? We'll talk about bee pests and diseases towards the end of the semester, so I won't go into great detail. But in general, what you're looking for are there any sunken caps? Do the caps have odd perforations? Is there a bad smell? Or do the larvae look unusual? Do you see like black larvae, greasy-looking larvae, swollen-looking larvae? All of those things are signs of disease in the hive. Oh gosh, it's 9:15. So I'll just show you this real quick. These are just some general signs of disease. So this is not disease, but this is chill brood. This is a situation where the hive got a little bit too cold and the brood died. So you see they've turned black. Not a good sign. A sign of American foul brood would be sunken caps like this, or perforated caps where you've got holes in them. American foul brood also smells really bad, though you might not be able to smell it in initial infection stages. And this would be a sign of a poor queen. We've got a couple signs going on here. The first of which is that you see that the capping pattern is discontiguous. We have lots of holes all over the place. We also have a queen cell that's been pulled out from the workers. And so that's a sign that the queen is probably in the process of getting replaced.
Oh, there's a bunch of queen cells on top of that.
Oh yeah, and we got a bunch of queen cells. So some signs that that's a queen that's in a bit of distress.